The air in Augusta, Georgia, felt heavier than Marcus remembered. The humidity clung to his skin, a sticky reminder that he was no longer in the dry heat of the Middle East. Still, there was something comforting about the familiar streets, the red brick houses with their neatly trimmed lawns, the creak of old porch swings under lazy autumn afternoons. After 15 years in the Army, 3 tours, 2 promotions, and more medals than he cared to count, Staff Sergeant Marcus Walker had come home for good. The decision hadn't come easy. He had spent his life in uniform, defined by discipline, duty, and the quiet pride of service. But now, the mission had ended. The war was over for him, at least. It was time to be a brother again, a son, maybe even something more. Time to put down roots, build something outside the battlefield. His mother's house still sat on the same tree-lined block, the same stoop he used to sit on as a teenager, talking nonsense with friends while the cicadas screamed above them. His little sister, Tasha, now 20, was in community college, studying nursing. Their mother, Evelyn, still worked 2 jobs, but somehow managed to cook enough food for an army whenever she knew he was coming. His homecoming had been quiet by choice. No parade, no big announcement. He arrived the night before, late, just past 11 o'clock. Tasha had hugged him like she would never let go. Evelyn had stood in the doorway, her eyes full of tears, shaking her head in disbelief before pulling him close. They talked for hours. Marcus didn't sleep much. He lay awake in his childhood bedroom, the ceiling fan wobbling overhead, thinking about what life would look like now that the uniform was packed away in a duffel bag under his bed. The next morning, he rose early out of habit. The sun had barely started to break through the blinds when he pulled on a plain black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. No insignia, no name tag, nothing that marked him as anything other than a black man in the South. He smiled at his reflection in the mirror, tired eyes but peaceful. He slipped out the front door, letting his family sleep, and walked toward Main Street, drawn by the promise of coffee and something fried. The local diner sat on the corner, like it always had, with its scratched windows and crooked open sign. He ordered eggs, grits, and sausage to go, along with 2 coffees. The waitress had smiled politely, unaware that she had just served a war veteran with 3 commendations. Marcus didn't mind. He wasn't looking for recognition. The quiet, the normal, this was what he wanted. As he walked back, the food warm in the paper bag, a gentle breeze lifted the smell toward him. He passed old houses, nodding at an elderly man watering his lawn. For a moment, everything felt exactly as it should. Familiar, safe. But then came the sound. A slow crunch of tires on asphalt. A patrol car pulling up beside the curb. Marcus glanced sideways, noting the white SUV, the dark blue stripe down the side. 2 officers inside. One driving, the other staring at him through mirrored sunglasses. He kept walking. The car inched forward. He didn't react, didn't change pace, didn't show nerves. But something inside him tightened just a little. A silent calculation, hands visible, posture relaxed, face neutral. "Hey!" one of the officers called out. Marcus turned slightly. "Morning. Where you headed?" the driver asked. Marcus lifted the bag slightly. "Home. Just picked up breakfast. You live around here?" He nodded, still calm. "Yeah. Grew up just a few blocks down." The officer in the passenger seat leaned forward. "Mind showing some ID?" Marcus blinked. "Is there a problem?" "You match a description," the driver said. Of course. Marcus knew that line. He'd heard it before. In airports. In cities. Even on base once, before someone realized who he was. "Sure," he said, reaching slowly into his back pocket. He pulled out his military ID first. It was habit. Proof of who he was, what he had done, where he had been. The officer took it, glanced at it quickly, then looked back at Marcus. "You got any other ID?" he asked. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That one not good enough?" The air shifted. The second officer opened his door. Marcus froze. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. The officer approached him slowly, hand near his holster. "Just relax," the man said, though Marcus hadn't done anything but stand. "I'm relaxed," Marcus said. But inside, something was beginning to unravel. He had just come home. This was his street, his town, his life. And still it wasn't enough. The officer took a step closer. Marcus forced himself to stay still. The patrol car idled behind them, exhaust curling into the crisp morning air. Marcus realized, too late, that his uniform, the one thing that had protected him in countless countries, wasn't with him now. Here, he was just a black man with a hoodie and a paper bag. And for some people, that was all they needed to see. The moment Marcus felt the officer's shadow moving closer, he instinctively adjusted his stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, body relaxed, hands visible. None of it came from fear, but from years of training on how to stay calm in uncertain situations. His mind, however, had already shifted. This wasn't Iraq. This wasn't a threat assessment during a raid. This was a sidewalk in his hometown, a bag of food in his hand, and a patrol officer treating him like a suspect. "Go ahead and put your hand behind your back," the approaching officer said, voice sharp, as if reading from a script already decided. Marcus didn't move. For what? The second officer, still in the patrol car, opened his door and stepped out, now both standing on either side of Marcus. "We said you match a description." The first officer snapped. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," Marcus replied, his voice steady but firmer now. "I haven't moved." The first officer reached for Marcus's arm, gripping it with force. Marcus instinctively tensed. The other officer closed in quickly, grabbing his other wrist. "You're making this harder than it has to be," the driver said. "I'm standing still," Marcus repeated. "You're the ones escalating this." But it didn't matter. Within seconds, he was being yanked, twisted, and thrown to the ground. The paper bag burst open on the sidewalk, eggs and grits splattering across the concrete. His face was pressed into the pavement, the scent of gasoline and fried sausage mixing in his nostrils as knees dug into his back. Someone shouted from across the street, but neither officer acknowledged it. One of them barked something about "stop moving," though Marcus wasn't moving at all. His hands were behind his back now, restrained by cold metal. His shoulder, already sore from an old injury during deployment, throbbed with sharp pain as one officer adjusted his position, putting more pressure on it than necessary. His breath was shallow. His jaw scraped against the pavement. Still, he said nothing. They hoisted him up by the cuffs and walked him to the patrol car. His hoodie had ridden up, exposing a long scar on his back, another souvenir from battlefield. Not that they cared. He wasn't a soldier to them, not in this moment. The officers didn't say where they were taking him. They didn't read any rights. They just shoved him into back seat, slammed the door, and pulled away from the curb. As the car began to roll, Marcus saw the old man who had been watering his lawn earlier now frozen in place, his hose still running, a confused, almost frightened expression on his face. The cruiser didn't drive far. Just a few blocks down, they stopped in front of an abandoned storefront, a place Marcus remembered used to be a barber shop when he was a kid. Now the windows were boarded and no one was around. The officer who had driven got out first. The other followed, opening the back door and dragging Marcus out roughly. "Why are we stopping here?" Marcus asked. No answer. Instead, he was shoved against the side of the cruiser. The officer leaned in close, the scent of tobacco and sweat thick between them. "You think you're smart?" the officer hissed. "Pulling attitude like you're better than us?" "I showed you my ID," Marcus said, gritting his teeth. "I didn't do anything." "That's where you're wrong," the officer said, jabbing a finger into his chest. "You disrespected direct order." Marcus laughed bitterly. "I followed every order for 15 years. I know the difference." The other officer stood off to the side, arms crossed, scanning the area casually like they weren't doing anything wrong, like this was routine. "You think we don't get people like you all the time?" the driver continued. "Big mouth. Thinking you're owed something because you served?" Marcus stared at him. "You don't know anything about me." The officer smirked, then shoved him again. "You ain't special. You're just another one of them walking around like the law doesn't apply to you." Marcus clenched his fist behind his back, the cuffs digging deeper into his skin. The metal burned now. "I'm done talking," he said. A long pause stretched between them. Then, finally, the second officer came forward, unlocked the cuffs without a word, and shoved Marcus toward the street. "Get out of here." Marcus staggered for a moment, his legs catching up to his balance. He turned, incredulous. "You're not even going to say why you stopped me?" "Walk," the driver said. And that was it. No ticket, no explanation, no apology, just a bruised shoulder, scuffed hands, and a lingering humiliation of being treated like a criminal for walking home with breakfast. He didn't walk right away. He stood there, blinking hard, pulse pounding in his ears. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken, but he wasn't sure what else to do. Eventually, he turned. He walked away. Not toward home, not yet, just away. He needed air. He ended up at a small park near the edge of the neighborhood, where kids used to play basketball and couples would have cookouts on summer afternoons. He sat on a bench, letting the pain settle into his bones. His hoodie was torn. His palms were scraped. A low ache in his ribs reminded him just how real it had all been. He stared at his hands. Strong hands. Steady hands. These were the same hands that had pulled comrades out of burning vehicles, applied pressure to wounds, built shelters, held dying men as they took their last breath. And now they trembled, not from fear, from fury. But still, he said nothing, did nothing. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Back at home, his mother had already noticed the time. When he finally walked through the door, his sister gasped. "What happened?" she demanded, rushing to him. Their mother followed behind, her expression already sinking into a familiar mix of worry and disbelief. Marcus hesitated, unsure of how much to say, but the truth was written across his face and down his torn sleeve and in the bruises already blooming on his wrists. His mother said nothing at first. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him as if to anchor him back to the world. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Marcus sat on the front porch alone. The moon was full, casting silver light over the quiet street. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, a siren wailed. And across town, in a high school bedroom, a 17-year-old girl sat hunched over a phone, rewatching a video she'd taken that morning. Her hands shook as she pressed upload. She didn't know his name, but she knew what she saw. And so, did everyone else who would watch it next. The first wave of reaction came just after midnight. A post on X, once known as Twitter, tagged simply, "This happened in Augusta today." No reason, no warning. Attached was a 58-second video. It showed a black man standing on a sidewalk holding a paper bag, speaking calmly to two white officers. Then came the sudden grab, the takedown, knees on his back, cuffs snapping into place. The man didn't scream. He didn't fight. He barely moved. The footage wasn't high quality, a little shaky vertical, probably recorded from a second-floor bedroom window, but what it showed was undeniable. Within minutes, it had been reposted by users across the city. By morning, it had broken through the digital surface of the local community and into the bloodstream of the wider internet. The girl who posted it, her username just a string of numbers and a sunflower icon, didn't speak in the clip, but she didn't need to. Her caption said enough. Why is this okay? By 7 o'clock in the morning, the video had been shared more than 100,000 times. By 10, it had been picked up by local news blogs and activist groups. It was on Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. Comment sections exploded. Strangers demanded context. Others responded with disbelief, then anger. Some wrote that they knew the man. Others speculated. Someone finally identified him, a veteran home from service, Marcus Walker. His name began trending by noon. Marcus, meanwhile, was unaware of what was happening online. He spent the morning nursing his shoulder, sitting at the kitchen table while his mother boiled water for tea she always made when the world got too loud. His sister, glued to her phone, kept looking at him, then looking away. When she finally asked if he wanted to see the video, he said nothing. She left her phone on the table, screen facing up. He watched it once. Then again, the second time, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and pressed his thumb against the pulse in his neck. It was elevated. "So this is what they saw," he murmured. His mother crossed herself. Lord, have mercy. The video had captured more than he expected. Not just a moment of contact, but the precise way he had been handled, how casually they had ignored his words. The camera had zoomed in enough to see the pain across his face when they bent his arm. The girl had filmed everything, and now the world had seen it too. His phone began to buzz. First it was Brian, a friend from high school, now working as a journalist in Atlanta. Then a former sergeant from his unit, asking if he was all right. Then a woman he hadn't spoken to since college, writing, "Is that really you in the video?" He didn't answer any of them. Around 1 o'clock, 2 local reporters knocked on the front door. His mother turned them away. Marcus didn't move from his chair. He watched the rain begin to fall outside, soft at first, then steadier, drumming against the porch roof. The sky had turned gray. A kind of tension settled into the air. By mid-afternoon, the clip was on the front page of major news sites. The sheriff's office finally responded. A short, 6-sentence statement posted to their official page read, "An internal review is underway concerning an incident involving a citizen and 2 deputies. At this time, the individual in question was detained due to matching the description of a suspect in a nearby theft. The situation is being assessed. No further comment will be made pending review." That was it. No names, no apologies, no accountability. Marcus read it once, scoffed, and pushed the screen away. A few hours later, a call came in from someone representing a local television station. Then another. Then someone claiming to be from a national outlet. Marcus still said nothing. His mother insisted they not speak publicly until they had legal representation. Tasha disagreed. She wanted the world to hear from Marcus now, while people were listening. But Marcus remained silent. That night, another video surfaced. A different angle. This one, filmed from a car parked a few spaces away. The person recording had rolled their window down and caught clearer audio of the officers' voices. The driver said, "You think you're better than us?" It echoed through the speakers like a verdict. Now the fire had fuel. By morning, national outlets picked it up. Headlines ran variations of the same question. Army vet brutalized by police. Why? Photos of Marcus in uniform, sourced from his old social media accounts, began to appear beside screen grabs of him face down on the pavement. One of them, showing his military ID on the ground near his hand, went viral on its own. The narrative was forming, and it wasn't being controlled by the department anymore. Comment sections were now filled with outrage, confusion, heartbreak. Other veterans began to post their own responses, calling the treatment disgraceful. Advocacy groups reached out. Public figures began resharing the clip, calling for the officers involved to be named and investigated. The hashtag Justice for Marcus spread quickly. Still, Marcus had not spoken publicly. On the second day, a group of neighbors gathered outside the sheriff's office holding signs that read, "We see you and serve and protect who?" It wasn't a protest yet, more like a vigil, quiet, determined. Inside his home, Marcus felt the weight of something building. The silence in the sheriff's office only deepened the divide. No charges were filed against him, no apology given. But the truth was no longer just his burden. Late that evening, his sister sat beside him again. "You know this doesn't go away," she said. "Not this time." "I know. They'll twist it if you don't say anything." He didn't respond. But hours later, alone in his room, Marcus opened his phone and set it on the dresser. He sat on the edge of his bed and pressed record. He spoke plainly. No script. No retakes. "My name is Marcus Walker. I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Army. I served 15 years. And yesterday, I was thrown to the ground and handcuffed in front of my neighbors. Not for a crime. Not for any reason. Just because I was walking home while black." He paused. "I've never posted a video like this before. I didn't want to. I didn't ask for this. But maybe this time, someone needs to see it from my side. Not just the video. Not just the headlines. Me." He talked for 6 minutes. Not just about what happened, but about what it meant. What it felt like to come home to a place that still didn't see him fully. What it was like to serve a country that let this happen. When he finished, he uploaded it to his social accounts, then turned his phone off. He went to bed without checking for reactions. By morning, the video had over 2 million views. He was no longer just a man in a viral clip. Now he was a voice, and the country was finally listening. By the end of the third day, it became painfully clear that the sheriff's office had underestimated the momentum behind the video. Marcus's account, filmed in a single take with no edits, had drawn in millions. Veterans, civic leaders, lawyers, and journalists had amplified his voice. Still, not a single official from the department had reached out. No visit, no call, no internal review documents released. Just the original vague statement, now circulating widely as a symbol of denial. The silence wasn't just a void, it was a message. Marcus's inbox was overflowing. National morning shows were requesting interviews. Influential civil rights organizations wanted to feature him in upcoming campaigns. A well-known black congressman from Georgia had posted that he was deeply disturbed and would push for full accountability. Despite all of this, Marcus remained still not inactive, but measured. He read every request, considered every offer, but he said yes to none. His mother, Evelyn, grew more anxious by the day. She started sleeping with the living room lights on, keeping the front door double-locked even during daylight. At first, Marcus thought she was simply nervous about the attention. But on the morning of the fourth day, her concern became concrete. She found a piece of paper shoved through the mail slot. No envelope, no signature, just block letters scribbled across the page. Should have stayed gone. Tasha wanted to call the police immediately, but Marcus stopped her. "What are you going to tell them?" he asked. "That the people we're trying to expose are threatening us?" Still, he photographed a note, stored it, and saved it in a private folder. That same afternoon, he noticed a black sedan parked at the far end of the street, engine idling for over an hour. The windows were tinted, plates obscured. The car never moved. Marcus stepped out onto the porch, stared directly at it. After a few minutes, it pulled away slowly. He didn't chase it, didn't need to. They wanted him to see them. That was the point. He knew intimidation tactics when he saw them. He had used similar methods overseas: soft pressure, presence, surveillance. The intent wasn't to confront. It was to isolate, make the target feel exposed, vulnerable, unprotected. But Marcus wasn't alone. Not anymore. A small team of veterans, some of whom he barely knew in person, had already started organizing online. They created a private chat group to strategize next steps, not just to support him, but to demand broader reforms. Some were ex-Army, some from the Navy or Air Force. A few had transitioned into law or politics. They had access, knowledge, leverage. It was one of them, a woman named Naomi Green, who finally called him directly. She wasn't a veteran, but had worked closely with military families for years. A civil rights attorney based in Atlanta, Naomi had already helped bring legal action against other police departments in the state. She didn't offer a promise, just a question. "Do you want to fight this legally or publicly?" she asked. "Because we can do both, but you need to lead the narrative." Marcus hesitated. "I don't want this to be about me," he said. "It's already about you," Naomi replied. "Now the question is whether it becomes about justice." They met 2 days later in a discreet office space in downtown Augusta. Naomi came prepared. She had pulled preliminary records, requested public access documents, and even spoken with former department employees. What she brought to the table was worse than Marcus expected. Both Deputy Paul Wexler and Officer Ryan Blake had prior complaints: use of force incidents, unlawful stops, discriminatory language, all documented, none resulting in suspension. Naomi showed him redacted files, internal memos, warning letters buried in administrative jargon. "This is a pattern," she explained, "and it's been protected by a shield of silence." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "So they just let it go on?" Naomi nodded. "They didn't just let it happen. They normalized it." Marcus didn't speak for a moment. Then, without looking up, he said, "I want to sue. But more than that, I want people to know this is real. This isn't just one bad day. That night, Marcus posted a second video. Unlike the first, this one wasn't just about his experience. It was about theirs, the others who had complained before him. He didn't share names or details, but he made it clear. The incident wasn't isolated. It was systemic. He ended the clip with one sentence: "I'm not going anywhere." By the following morning, local news outlets reported that the sheriff's office had refused all interview requests. No press conference. No additional statements. The two officers had not been placed on administrative leave. No disciplinary action had been taken. Community frustration boiled over. A protest was scheduled for the coming Saturday, organized not by activists, but by everyday residents of Augusta, teachers, retirees, small business owners. The flyer circulating online featured a single image, Marcus's face bruised and steady. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office barricaded its front entrance. On Friday, one of Marcus's old Army colleagues, Anthony Sosa, flew in from Colorado. He had been part of Marcus's unit during their second tour and had stayed in touch over the years. They hugged in the driveway like brothers. "You never look for trouble," Anthony said quietly, "but you never turn away from it either." That night, the porch was quiet again. The lights were off. Marcus sat alone, watching the street. No car tonight, no note, but the silence still pressed against him. Inside, his sister scrolled through posts on her phone. One caught her attention. It was from a small account, anonymous, with barely any followers. But the post was chilling. "Let him speak all he wants. We know where he lives." She showed it to Marcus. He read it, closed the screen, and said, "Save it." Screenshot everything. They both knew this wasn't over. The department might not have spoken, but its silence was already louder than any denial. The morning of the protest came with an overcast sky and a tense quiet that stretched over Augusta like a hell breath. Despite the gray clouds and the undercurrent of anxiety, hundreds gathered at the city square near the courthouse. They came with signs, with resolve, with phones raised and voices steady. Among the crowd were people Marcus hadn't seen in years. Former classmates, neighbors, even an old coach from high school. He did not speak at the protest. He watched from a distance, standing beside Naomi Green, who had insisted on a low profile for now. The focus, she said, had to remain on the facts, not on emotion, not on theatrics. "We'll speak," she told him, "but we'll do it when the weight of truth is in our hands." And that weight arrived quietly 3 days later. Naomi's legal team had filed an open records request for the personnel files of deputies Paul Wexler and Ryan Blake. The sheriff's office stalled the process, citing internal review procedures. But through other channels, former department employees, confidential contacts, and old civil cases, Naomi acquired copies of prior complaints, disciplinary recommendations that were never enforced, and internal communications that painted a disturbing picture. Wexler had been involved in at least 4 questionable stops involving black men in the last 2 years. One had resulted in injury. Another had led to a brief internal affairs review, which was shut down without public explanation. Blake's record was thinner, but Naomi found evidence that he had been written up twice for unprofessional conduct during traffic stops, a phrase that was carefully worded to avoid triggering automatic public reporting. The most damning piece wasn't a document, but a voice. A former dispatcher named Leanne Thurston had seen Marcus's video online and reached out anonymously through Naomi's office. She was retired now, living in a different county, but had spent over a decade handling radio communication and clerical logs for the sheriff's department. What she shared was more than a statement. It was a memory she hadn't been able to forget. There were times when Wexler would radio in stops before he even made them, she told Naomi during a recorded call. Like he had someone already picked out just for walking down the wrong street. It was always the same script, matches a description, and it was always a black man. Naomi asked if she was willing to go on record. Leanne hesitated. "Not yet," she said. "But if this goes to court, I won't stay silent forever." Meanwhile, the department continued to say nothing. No interviews, no clarification, no suspension. But something had shifted. Officers at routine posts around the city appeared more guarded, their interactions more controlled. It was subtle, but noticeable, a change in posture, in tone, and how long they lingered before walking away. Marcus began to sense a quiet fracture within the department itself. A few officers, ones he recognized from high school or church, made eye contact in public, nodded once, then quickly turned away. Others refused to meet his gaze at all. Naomi told him it was a familiar pattern. When truth loomed close, some in the system began preparing their exits, others their defenses. It was during this time that Naomi introduced Marcus to a trusted ally, a retired federal investigator named Glenn Randall. He had worked on civil rights cases in the South during the late 90s and early 2000s and was known for his meticulous approach to uncovering misconduct within law enforcement agencies. Randall didn't speak much during their first meeting. He asked questions, listened carefully, took notes. When it was over, he simply said, "There's more. You just need someone who knows where to look." And look he did. Within a week, Randall had compiled a preliminary report based on public and private data sources, court filings, and cross-reference complaints across the state. He found a cluster of incidents tied to the Augusta Sheriff's Office, specifically during shifts supervised by Wexler or involving traffic checkpoints where Blake was present. Most had been buried in bureaucracy or settled quietly without acknowledgement. Naomi studied the findings with growing concern. "This isn't just two officers," she said. "It's a network. A pattern of behavior that's been quietly protected, maybe even encouraged." Marcus sat across from her in silence. Finally, he said, "So now we name it." Naomi nodded. "But we do it carefully. This department plays defense through intimidation and delay. We need more than outrage. We need indisputable truth." It was Marcus who took the next step. On a Sunday evening, dressed in a dark blazer and sitting in the same spot where he'd recorded his first video, he posted again. This time, he spoke with a lawyer's precision and a soldier's resolve. "I'm not just a victim of one bad day," he said. "I'm the product of a department that has ignored red flags, dismissed complaints, and protected repeat offenders. I've seen the records. I've heard the stories. And I've decided to act." He didn't name the officers, not yet. But he named the truth, that the problem wasn't isolated, and the silence from leadership spoke louder than any defense could. That same night, Naomi filed the intent to sue the Augusta Sheriff's Office on behalf of Marcus Walker, citing unlawful detention, excessive force, and civil rights violations. The document was made public the next morning. The department released another statement, short, defensive, and carefully worded. The Augusta Sheriff's Office stands by its officers and will cooperate fully with any lawful proceedings. No further comment will be made at this time. But by now, public pressure had surpassed containment. Community leaders began requesting meetings with city officials. Members of the county board called for independent oversight. A group of retired officers published an open letter supporting a full investigation. And students at the local university announced a walkout in solidarity with Marcus, scheduled for the following week. The truth behind the badge was no longer hidden. It was unfolding in court documents, in whistleblower testimony, in the steady drumbeat of public demand. And Marcus, who had once hoped for a quiet return home, now found himself at the center of a fight much bigger than his own, one he had never asked for, but one he would no longer walk away from. It started with a press conference, one hastily called, unannounced in most outlets, held inside a sterile municipal chamber without media seating. The department spokesperson, flanked by the sheriff and two unnamed legal advisors, stepped up to the podium and began reading from a prepared statement. The tone was clipped, neutral, and carefully rehearsed. "In light of recent accusations against members of our department, we are releasing footage from the officers' body cameras for public review. The Augusta Sheriff's Office stands firmly by the principle of transparency and lawful conduct." What followed was a heavily edited clip, under 2 minutes, compiled from multiple angles. It began midway through the officers' encounter with Marcus, completely omitting their initial approach. The footage started with him already standing still, one officer speaking off camera, another stepping forward. The audio was grainy but captured phrases like uncooperative and hands near waistband, intended to cast suspicion. The takedown was shown, but only briefly, and with quick cuts before and after the moment of restraint. The narrative being constructed was clear. The officers had followed protocol, and Marcus had escalated the situation. It was a calculated move. The department didn't release the full body cam footage, nor the incident reports, nor the radio logs from that day. But the clip, dubbed Corrected Timeline of August 17th Encounter, was immediately distributed to local news stations and uploaded to the department's website. The sheriff declined questions afterward. Within hours, the internet erupted again, but this time more chaotically. Supporters of Marcus were quick to point out the missing context, the awkward cuts, the absent timestamps. Others, newly introduced to the story through the official footage, began to question his account. The phrase, "he wasn't totally innocent," started appearing in comment sections. A few cable commentators took the bait. Is this another case of rushing to judgment? One host asked during a panel segment, "Are we being shown one side of a complex situation again?" Marcus, watching from home, said nothing. He had expected retaliation, but not how quickly and not how precisely it would aim to fracture public opinion. Naomi was furious. "They're shaping the battlefield," she said, pacing across the room of her small office. "They can't beat us with facts, so they're shifting the narrative, muddying it just enough to create doubt." Her team issued a response within hours, demanding the full, unedited footage be released immediately, along with all communication logs from that shift. The request was met with silence, but something else was already happening behind the scenes. Anonymous emails began arriving in Marcus's inbox. Some were vague threats, full of passive-aggressive warnings. Others were more aggressive, filled with racial slurs and promises of payback. He forwarded each to Naomi's office. They were documenting everything now, not just for the case, but for his protection. Then came the headlines. A local blog ran a story implying Marcus had been disciplined during his service. It cited military sources, but provided no records, no names, no dates. The article spread through back channels on social media, amplified by fringe accounts. The story was false. Marcus had never faced disciplinary action. His service record was clean, his honors well documented. But the lie didn't need to be true. It just needed to exist long enough to echo. Naomi's legal assistant tracked the blog's publisher to a man in South Carolina with ties to local law enforcement circles. The connection was circumstantial but suggestive. "They're not trying to win legally," Naomi told Marcus that night. "They're trying to bury you under noise." He nodded slowly. "It's working. I can feel people pulling away." But not everyone. A former officer named David Linwood, retired 2 years earlier after over 25 years on the force, published an open letter in the Augusta Daily Press. In it, he described a culture of denial within the department, one that prioritized loyalty over accountability. He stopped short of naming names, but emphasized a systemic tolerance for biased policing tactics that had gone unchecked for years. The letter gained traction. Then, another twist, a new video surfaced, not of Marcus's incident, but of a different stop involving Deputy Wexler. This one, from 2 years prior, had never been released. A young black man was pulled over for a supposed license plate issue, yet the footage showed no violation. The stop escalated quickly. Language used by Wexler was aggressive, borderline threatening. The man was searched without cause. The video had been suppressed internally, flagged as sensitive and never included in the department's public log. Its leak changed everything. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about one incident. It was about a pattern. Naomi's team moved fast. They filed an emergency motion to compel the department to release all body cam footage from Wexler and Blake spanning the previous 12 months. They also subpoenaed internal records regarding suppression of evidence. The sheriff's office responded by filing a motion to dismiss the civil suit, claiming procedural missteps, jurisdictional technicalities, and failure to present actionable harm. It was a stalling tactic, but it indicated something critical. The department was afraid of what might come next. Meanwhile, Marcus faced pressure from all directions. A national news anchor requested an exclusive interview. Advocacy groups wanted to feature him in their campaigns. A documentary team reached out. Every day, more noise, more exposure, more decisions. But not all attention was positive. Late one night, Marcus was driving home from a private meeting with Naomi when he noticed a car following him. Headlights steady, never changing lanes. Always 2 cars behind. He took 3 different turns. The car matched each one. He pulled into a well-lit gas station. The car drove past but returned within 10 minutes, parking at the far end of the lot. He stayed inside until the clerk walked him to his vehicle. Nothing happened, but the message was clear. They were watching. And yet, even under pressure, Marcus didn't bend. He released another short video. Not defensive, not angry, but resolute. "The truth doesn't need edits," he said. "I don't need to invent anything. I just want the full story told. Let the evidence speak." The video ended with a single request: release everything. That phrase began appearing across social media, on protest signs, even on t-shirts. Release everything. Support began to coalesce again. More former officers reached out to Naomi's office, offering sealed testimonies under condition of anonymity. Civic organizations pledged legal funds. A group of Black veterans organized a National Day of Solidarity, encouraging service members to speak out about discrimination after deployment. The department had tried to fight back, with edits, smears, and silence. But in doing so, they had revealed just how deep the rot had gone. And Marcus, once quiet, now stood at the center of a growing reckoning. Not because he shouted the loudest, but because he refused to be silenced. The studio lights were brighter than Marcus expected. Not hot, just sterile. Too clean, too quiet, like the calm before a storm. Across from him sat the host, a well-known journalist whose reputation for hard but fair interviews had made this televised conversation a high-stakes moment. It wasn't a soundstage or news panel. It was a one-on-one, long-form interview, scheduled for prime time. Marcus had agreed reluctantly, only after Naomi assured him the terms were secure. No ambush questions, no early edits, no reruns without approval. It was a rare kind of deal in a media landscape hungry for sensationalism, and he wasn't doing it for fame. He was doing it to seize back control. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, a silver pin of the American flag on his lapel. The makeup artist had tried to soften the scar on his jaw, a faint line from a roadside blast overseas. But he told her to leave it. That scar, like all the others, was part of the truth. The host leaned forward, voice low but clear. "Why now, Marcus? Why speak out in this way?" Marcus didn't blink. "Because I've been silent long enough. Because this didn't start with me, and it won't end with me. But if I don't tell my part, then they get to tell it for me. And I've seen what they do with silence." The interview lasted nearly 40 minutes. Marcus spoke with calm precision, detailing the incident, the legal developments, the smear tactics, and most of all, the community that had rallied behind him. He didn't speak in anger, though it was just beneath the surface. He spoke in facts, verifiable, detailed, undeniable. When asked what justice looked like for him, Marcus paused and said, "Justice isn't just 2 names on a suspension list. It's accountability. It's exposure. It's making sure that every time someone in uniform abuses their power, there's a consequence. Not just a complaint filed and buried, but real, lasting accountability." That night, the interview aired to over 7 million viewers. Clips were reshared across platforms within minutes. Veterans groups held watch parties. Students live-tweeted every quote. Civil rights leaders called it one of the most composed, powerful public testimonies in recent memory. But the real shift happened the next morning. Veterans Affairs officials issued a statement of support, calling Marcus's case a painful reminder that many service members return home to battles they never trained for. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs offered to meet privately with Marcus to discuss broader reforms related to veteran police interactions. It was symbolic, but meaningful, a federal acknowledgement that gave his case more weight than ever before. Soon after, a National Veterans Coalition launched an official petition calling for a full Department of Justice review of the Augusta Sheriff's Office. Within 72 hours, it reached over 2 million verified signatures. News outlets began reporting on it as a historic civilian-led petition effort, signaling a rare bipartisan convergence of support. Marcus's control of the narrative wasn't just reactive anymore. It was strategic. He began appearing on panels, not just to speak about his incident, but to advocate for legislation aimed at increasing transparency in law enforcement, especially in how body cam footage was handled and how citizen complaints were processed. Behind the scenes, Naomi and her team continued building their case. Depositions began. Witnesses came forward, some anonymously, others ready to speak on record. One, a former training supervisor from the department, disclosed that Wexler had failed multiple performance reviews related to de-escalation training, but had remained on patrol due to a culture of brotherhood over protocol. The phrase quickly became a media headline. Marcus used this moment to launch something more permanent, a foundation called Shield to Serve, aimed at protecting veterans from racial profiling and offering legal resources for those caught in similar systems of silence. Within days, donations poured in. The board included lawyers, former military leaders, civil rights advocates, and eventually survivors of similar abuse. It wasn't just a nonprofit. It was a movement. One morning, as Marcus sat on the back porch reviewing messages from fellow veterans, he received a call from someone unexpected. Captain Lisa Monroe. Her name had come up only in passing before, usually in whispers, always with respect. She was still active within the department, one of the highest-ranking officers and one of the few women in leadership. Her voice was steady. "I saw your interview," she said, "and I've seen the files Naomi's team has been collecting." Marcus waited. "I have information," she continued, "not just about Wexler and Blake, about how complaints were handled, about who buried them. If I step forward, it won't just cost me my badge. It might cost me everything, but I think it's time." He didn't pressure her. He only said, "Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But the truth matters. And so do you." They hung up, and Marcus knew a reckoning was coming, not just for the two officers, but for the system that had shielded them. Meanwhile, retaliation efforts hadn't stopped. An anonymous caller left a voicemail referencing his sister by name, suggesting she shouldn't drive at night alone. Another message came to the Foundation's contact form with Marcus's old deployment number attached, a number that wasn't public. Naomi escalated both incidents to federal investigators. Still, Marcus didn't retreat. He increased security, yes. Traveled with two veterans from his former unit who had volunteered to act as quiet protection. But he never hid. He walked into every interview, courtroom, and public event with his head high. Because control wasn't just about press. It was about presence. The officers had tried to reduce him to a suspect. The department had tried to blur him into a liability. But now, standing before cameras and communities alike, he was a symbol of what it meant to fight with dignity. Not just for himself, but for everyone who came home expecting safety and found suspicion instead. And as the case moved toward trial, Marcus understood what was coming next. The defense would deny everything. The courtroom would test every detail of his story. But he was ready. Because for the first time since that morning on the sidewalk, the ground beneath his feet finally felt steady again. Not because the danger was gone, but because he had chosen to stand firm in the face of it. The threats had always been subtle, slipped into inboxes, whispered across darkened phone lines, embedded in silence. But now they began to take shape, not as shadows on a screen, but as actions in the real world. Retaliation was no longer theoretical. It had found a face, a method, a badge. It started with Marcus's sister, Tasha. She was driving home from her nursing classes one evening when the red and blue lights lit up behind her. The road was quiet, a stretch of two-lane pavement bordered by fields, just past the county line. The cruiser followed her for nearly a mile before flashing its lights. She pulled over calmly, uncertain of what she had done wrong. Her registration was current. Her headlights were on. She hadn't been speeding. The officer approached slowly. She rolled the window down. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "You were driving with a broken taillight." Tasha blinked. "That's not possible. I checked them last week." The officer didn't respond. He asked for her license and registration. She handed them over, her hand shaking slightly. The interaction stretched longer than necessary. He returned to his cruiser, sat inside for almost 20 minutes, then returned without a ticket. "Get that light fixed," he said, before walking away. When Tasha got home, Marcus met her at the door. She was pale, her voice flat, "They knew who I was," she whispered. He never said it directly, but he lingered too long, like he was trying to send a message. Marcus didn't hesitate. He inspected her car himself. The taillights worked perfectly. He took photos, videos. Naomi submitted a formal complaint to the State Police Oversight Committee. But as they both knew, it was just the beginning. Days later, Naomi's law office was vandalized. No forced entry, no theft. Just her private case files scattered across the floor, and a single word spray-painted across the interior conference room window. Liars. Surveillance footage mysteriously malfunctioned the same night. The building's management claimed the cameras stopped recording for several hours due to a power anomaly. Naomi didn't speak about it publicly, not yet. But when she met with Marcus the next morning, her voice was clipped, her expression harder than usual. "This isn't just resistance," she said. "It's an operation. Coordinated, careful, and protected." Marcus listened without surprise. "I've seen it before," he said, "in a different uniform, different mission." But what struck him deeper than the incident itself was how little effort the perpetrators made to hide it. They didn't want to stay invisible anymore. They wanted to be seen, to be felt, to remind him and everyone around him that their reach was long and their silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The same day, Marcus received a package with no return address. Inside was a copy of his own military service record, photocopied, highlighted, annotated in red ink. Certain phrases circled, comments scribbled in the margins. One note read, "Even soldiers break." Another, beside a commendation, said, "Still just a man." He didn't show it to his mother. He tucked it away, logged it, reported it. But the emotional weight lingered. Anthony Sosa, the fellow veteran who had flown in weeks ago, now stayed permanently at Marcus's house. Not as a bodyguard. Marcus refused that label. But as a friend, a witness, and a silent protector. His presence changed the energy in the house. More cautious movements. Fewer lights off. Doors checked twice. Despite the growing danger, Marcus continued to move forward. Public support remained strong. The foundation grew. Donations increased. Volunteers signed up across state lines. But the attacks, each more personal, more invasive, forced Marcus to rethink visibility. The higher he climbed, the more vulnerable those around him became. He tried to shield his mother as much as possible, but Evelyn Walker was no stranger to pressure. When her phone line was flooded with silent calls in the middle of the night, she sat up calmly and said, "If they're calling me, it means they're afraid of you." She didn't flinch. Not once. Marcus, however, understood the long game. The retaliation wasn't about stopping him now. It was about wearing him down slowly. Turning his allies into liabilities, making the cost of justice too high to bear. It nearly worked. One night, Naomi called with her voice shaking. Not from fear, but from fury. "I just lost one of my cooperating witnesses," she said. He backed out, said he's being followed, said he's not safe anymore. Marcus closed his eyes. "Can we protect him?" "We can try," she said. "But it's not just him. I've had 2 other contacts go silent. One of them, a clerk from records, told me flat out, 'If I give you anything else, I won't be around to testify.' They're shutting doors, Marcus, every way they can." He didn't answer immediately. Then finally he said, "So we find another way." And they did. Instead of relying solely on insiders, Naomi's team began compiling a full independent review of the sheriff's department using civilian reports, third-party audits, and even input from outside law enforcement agencies willing to quietly contribute expertise. The strategy shifted. Less dependence on internal cracks, more emphasis on public architecture, data, documents, undeniable truths. But retaliation didn't stop. Anonymous tips flooded media hotlines with false leads, allegations that Marcus had falsified military records, that he'd been disciplined for insubordination overseas, that he'd once been investigated for misconduct during active duty. Each claim was fabricated. Each one refuted swiftly. Still, the goal was never to prove guilt. The goal was to exhaust him. Marcus responded not by hiding, but by reinforcing his message. He released another public statement. Not a video this time, but a written letter addressed to the people of Augusta. It read, in part, "I know what fear looks like. I've seen it in war zones. I've seen it in the eyes of men facing impossible odds. But what I see now isn't fear. It's desperation. A system trying to protect itself by punishing truth, by threatening families, by using the badge not as a symbol of law, but as a weapon against those who dare to speak. I will not be quiet. I will not step back. I will not be afraid." The letter was printed in full on the front page of the Augusta Daily Press. It was read aloud at City Hall. And quietly, behind closed doors, members of the city council began holding private meetings. They didn't announce them. They didn't invite press. But whispers spread. Something was shifting. Not publicly. Not yet. But it was movement. One night, as Marcus stood outside, watching headlights move cautiously past the street, Anthony came out beside him. "You think this ends in court?" Anthony asked. "No," Marcus said. "It ends when they realize we're not going anywhere." It was a Thursday evening when the message arrived, encrypted and signed, and routed through a secure contact form on the Shield to Serve Foundation's website. Naomi read it first. The tone was careful, composed. The language hinted at someone with knowledge of departmental procedures. But what mattered most was the claim it made. "I have access to the full body cam footage from the morning Marcus was detained. It contradicts everything released publicly. I also have internal emails that show deliberate attempts to suppress and alter incident records. I will release them to you, but I cannot reveal my identity yet." Attached to the message was a secure cloud link and a single file, a preview clip of the unedited footage. Naomi opened it immediately, heart pounding as the raw, uncut feed loaded. It showed the exact moment the patrol car first spotted Marcus, still blocks away from the diner, long before any interaction. The officer spoke casually, joking, then shifted in tone when they saw him. "There he is," Wexler said. "Matches, right?" Blake replied. "No idea, but let's find out." Then the lights came on. There was no report of a suspect, no description being relayed over the radio. The officers had made the decision entirely on their own. It was damning. Naomi immediately forwarded the clip to Marcus, along with a single message: "We're not alone." They met in person that night. Naomi's office had installed additional security since the last breach, but even so, the mood was tense. Marcus, seated across from her, watched the footage again in silence. "This changes everything," Naomi said, "not just for your case, but for the entire department. If this is real, if the rest is consistent, it confirms premeditated profiling and deliberate manipulation of public records." Marcus didn't say anything for a while. When he finally looked up, his voice was steady. "Then we have to get it all." Over the next 72 hours, the anonymous source continued feeding material, slowly, carefully. First came emails, internal correspondence between senior officers discussing how to minimize the optics of Marcus's incident, then a memo referencing potential community fallout, and advising against immediate suspension of the officers involved. But the most significant leak came in the form of an access log. It documented precisely when body cam footage was edited, who requested the changes, and which versions had been stored. According to the log, a supervisor, Lieutenant Brandon Avery, had personally authorized the removal of the first 3 minutes of footage from both officers' cameras. The reasoning was listed in bureaucratic jargon: redundancy reduction for public clarity. Marcus read that line aloud in disbelief. "Redundancy reduction," he said. "That's what they call deleting the truth." By the weekend, the material had been authenticated by 2 independent forensic analysts retained by Naomi's team. Every timestamp matched. Every file was traceable. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was systemic. Still, the source remained anonymous until Sunday. A private meeting was arranged at a neutral location, an abandoned storefront on the edge of town, recently leased by one of Naomi's contacts. Naomi, Marcus, and Anthony arrived just after sunset. The air was sharp with the scent of dust and old paint. A single desk lamp lit the room. The source entered through the back door. It was Officer Derek Keller. He was young, late 20s, with 5 years in the department, and a reputation for being quiet, competent, and unremarkable. but his expression now was anything but. He looked exhausted, like someone who had been holding a secret that had eaten at him until it became unbearable. "I can't watch them destroy someone else," Keller said. "I saw the footage before they cut it. I knew what they did was wrong. And I waited, thinking someone higher up would step in. But then they started twisting everything. I heard the conversations. I saw the reports being edited. They made it personal." Naomi nodded. "Why now?" Keller looked at Marcus. "Because he didn't flinch," he said. "Because they want him gone and he's still here. And if I don't do something, then I'm part of it too." He handed Naomi a small hard drive. It contained every file he had extracted, some official, some private, all incriminating. In return, Naomi promised him legal protection, full anonymity in early filings, and, if necessary, whistleblower status under federal protection statutes. As they left the meeting, Marcus paused beside Keller. "You didn't have to do this," he said. Keller replied, "No, I had to. That's the difference." Back at Naomi's office, the full scope of what Keller had provided became clear. There were training logs indicating which officers had skipped mandatory de-escalation courses, Wexler among them. There were signed approvals for body cam deactivation permissions, misused under the guise of confidentiality. There were performance evaluations with key criticisms removed. But what hit hardest was a list of names, citizens who had filed complaints against Wexler and Blake over the past 5 years. Most of them had never received follow-ups. Their reports had been classified as resolved or misfiled. Marcus sat back, rubbing his jaw. "So we weren't the first." "No," Naomi said, "but you might be the last, if we do this right." With Keller's permission, Naomi prepared a formal motion to introduce the leaked material into discovery. She also began preparing the groundwork for a possible federal investigation request. The Justice Department had remained quiet, but now they had more than enough cause to act. Meanwhile, Marcus recorded another message, not a video this time, but an open letter published through national outlets. To those inside the system who feel trapped, you are not alone. The silence they demand of you is how they keep power. But truth has a weight of its own, and when enough people carry it, they can't crush it, not anymore. The letter was shared by law enforcement reform groups across the country. Dozens of current and former officers, inspired by Marcus's resolve and Keller's bravery, began contacting Naomi's office with stories, files, and requests for guidance. Some remained anonymous. Others asked to speak under oath. For the first time, the department was no longer one voice behind a wall of silence. There were cracks. And through those cracks, the truth was finally beginning to flood in. The courthouse was older than it looked. Red brick, weathered pillars, a building that stood through decades of trials, of verdicts whispered and shouted through its echoing halls. But on the morning the civil case of Marcus Walker versus Richmond County Sheriff's Office began, there was nothing quiet about the atmosphere. Local media lined the courthouse steps. Protesters, supporters, skeptics, and survivors of their own injustices gathered with signs and cameras. The tension was electric, the air heavy with anticipation. Inside, Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table beside Naomi and her legal team, all dressed in the same calm, sober professionalism that had become their armor. He wore a navy suit, the same American flag pin on his lapel. His posture was upright, composed, but his jaw was tight. His eyes never wandered. Across the room sat deputies Wexler and Blake with their attorneys, silent, cold, and unflinching. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs until the bailiff called for silence. All rise. Judge Roland Whitaker entered, a stern, methodical man known for his aversion to theatrics. He looked over the room before taking a seat and gesturing for everyone to do the same. Opening arguments began with precision. Naomi stood, hands folded, and delivered a calm but deliberate address to the jury. "You will hear the facts," she said. "You will see the video. You will read the internal emails. You will hear from witnesses, some of whom risked everything to be here. But above all, you'll be asked to answer one question. Does the badge grant the right to erase the truth?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The defense followed with a strategy that had been expected, but still felt jarring in its boldness. Their lead counsel, a sharp and overly confident man in his 50s, argued that the incident was a routine stop based on matching descriptions, and that the plaintiff, though a decorated soldier, did not cooperate as expected. He claimed the force used was within departmental policy and dismissed the now viral video as an emotionally charged fragment that does not reflect the full context. But context was the very thing Naomi had spent months preparing. The first witness was a teenager who had recorded the original viral video. Now 18, she walked to the stand nervously, but spoke clearly. She confirmed she had never seen Marcus before that day. She had simply looked out her bedroom window when she noticed the police slow their car beside a man holding a bag of food. What stood out to her was how quickly things escalated. They didn't talk to him long, she said. 1 second they were asking questions. The next he was on the ground. He wasn't yelling or pushing or anything. Next came the forensic video analyst Naomi had hired to examine all available footage, official and leaked. He walked the jury through a frame-by-frame breakdown, highlighting the missing timestamps in the body cam footage released by the department and matching them against the raw files provided by Keller. The jury watched, stone-faced, as the analyst revealed the exact moment the video had been edited. They removed nearly 3 minutes, the expert said. This was not a technical glitch. This was a deliberate extraction. The defense attempted to discredit the analyst's qualifications. The judge overruled the objection. On the third day, Marcus took the stand. The courtroom went silent as he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. Naomi guided the questioning, but let him speak freely. He told the story without dramatics, recounting every moment from the walk home to the pressure of knees in his back, to the bruises that lasted weeks, and the deeper damage that still hadn't healed. I served 3 tours overseas, he said. I've been through things most people will never imagine, but I never expected to come home and be treated like I didn't belong on my own street. He paused, looking toward the jury. I was wearing civilian clothes. I was holding breakfast, but none of that mattered. Not to them. They didn't see a soldier. They saw a threat. When Naomi asked him how the incident changed his life, Marcus didn't flinch. It showed me that silence protects systems, that if I didn't speak, someone else would be next. Maybe someone without a video, without support, without a lawyer. That's why I'm here. The defense declined to cross-examine him. Over the following days, the courtroom became a crucible for truths long buried. Naomi called witnesses from within the department, some reluctant, others defiant. One officer, subpoenaed and clearly uncomfortable, confirmed that Wexler had a reputation for aggressive behavior during traffic stops, particularly toward young black men. Another admitted that the department had no clear process for addressing repeated misconduct complaints. Then came the emails. They were read aloud in court, their contents like cracks in a dam, messages between senior staff referencing optics and media control, one noting, "We can't let this become another viral mess." The implication was unmistakable. The incident wasn't viewed as a failure of ethics or policy. It was a public relations problem. But the moment that truly shifted the courtroom's atmosphere came near the end of the second week, when Naomi announced a surprise witness. Whispers filled the gallery as Captain Lisa Monroe entered. Dressed in full uniform, a folder tucked under her arm, she took the stand with calm authority. Naomi wasted no time. "Captain Monroe, how long have you served in the Richmond County Sheriff's Office?" 23 years, she replied. "And in that time, have you filed any concerns about the conduct of Deputies Wexler or Blake?" Monroe opened her folder, revealing several formal complaint copies, each signed, time-stamped, and ignored. She slid them across to the clerk for the jury to examine. "Yes," she said, "I filed multiple reports. None were acted upon." Naomi nodded. "And did you receive any response from leadership?" Monroe's voice lowered. "I was told to let it go, that it wasn't worth rocking the boat." Her testimony continued for over an hour. She confirmed the suppression of internal reviews, the misuse of departmental authority to shield certain officers, and the informal pressure to fall in line. They didn't just tolerate misconduct, she said. They institutionalized it. The defense attempted to discredit her, but Monroe held firm. She had nothing to gain. Her promotion had already been stalled. Her career, by speaking out was effectively over, but her testimony landed with the force of a gavel. Even Judge Whitaker's normally impassive expression shifted. By the end of the third week, the jury had heard every angle, every contradiction, every buried truth. The closing arguments echoed through a courtroom that had now borne witness not just to an individual story, but to the system that had allowed it to happen. Marcus watched the jury file out, their expressions unreadable. Their decision would come in days, but he already felt something he hadn't in a long time. Certainty not in the outcome, but in the fact that the full story had finally been told. The courthouse lights dimmed as the jury retired to deliberate, and the mood in the city shifted once more. No longer a question of truth, but of justice. People waited in restaurants with televisions tuned to news channels. Students at the local university sat in quiet circles, refreshing news feeds. For Marcus, though, the most profound silence came inside Naomi's office, where strategy had momentarily been replaced by something rarer: reflection. It was in that pause that the next revelation landed. Not in the courtroom, but in the inbox of a trusted federal contact Naomi had cultivated throughout the case. An internal affairs report, previously unreleased, stamped confidential, and marked for deletion under the directive of Deputy Chief Harold Garrison. It contained findings from a 2020 investigation into Wexler's conduct. Specifically, a stop-and-search involving a young man who later filed a formal complaint. That complaint had mysteriously disappeared from departmental records. The IA report, however, had survived in a backup system outside departmental control, maintained by the oversight software provider contracted to the city. It included officer statements, the complainant's written affidavit, and, most critically, a full transcript of the original body cam footage, now believed lost. According to the transcript, Wexler had referred to the young man using racially charged language, then joked his partner afterward. He looked guilty enough. That's all we need around here. The case was quietly closed without discipline. Naomi studied the report for nearly an hour, cross-referencing names, dates, internal signatures. Everything was real. But the final page of the file was what truly shook her: a summary recommendation, signed by Captain Lisa Monroe herself, requesting Wexler's immediate suspension and mandatory retraining. It had been overruled, not just ignored, buried. Naomi called Marcus in. "This isn't just negligence," she said. "It's active protection. They kept him on the street after confirming his behavior, and they silenced the only person who tried to stop it." Marcus read through the report in stunned silence, then asked a question neither of them wanted to answer. "What happens to Monroe now?" The answer came within 24 hours. Captain Lisa Monroe was placed on administrative leave. The department announced it through a curt memo sent to local media, citing breach of internal confidentiality and violation of professional conduct standards. No details were provided, no charges filed, but the message was unmistakable. Cooperation would be punished. Truth would be met with consequences. The move backfired immediately. Community leaders erupted. Advocacy groups flooded the sheriff's office with statements condemning the action. A coalition of current and retired officers published an open letter demanding Monroe's reinstatement and an independent inquiry into the department's command structure. Protests reignited, peaceful, focused, but larger than before. Naomi moved quickly. She held a press conference that same evening, standing in front of her office with Marcus and Monroe beside her. Cameras crowded the sidewalk. Reporters leaned forward, recording every word. "This is not just retaliation," Naomi said. "This is proof. Proof that this department is more concerned with protecting itself than protecting the people it serves." Captain Monroe did her duty. She told the truth, and for that, she was removed. But we will not be silenced. Monroe stepped up next, her voice steady despite the storm brewing around her. "I spent 23 years upholding the law," she said. "I never thought the day would come when doing the right thing would cost me my badge. But I don't regret it, because if we don't speak, if we don't break the cycle, nothing changes." Her words struck something deeper in the public. Within days, a petition calling for her reinstatement gathered over 100,000 signatures. Several city council members called for an emergency session to investigate the sheriff's leadership. And quietly, behind the scenes, Naomi received a call from an official within the state's attorney general's office. "We're watching closely," they said. "The ground's shifting. Stay ready." Marcus, meanwhile, kept moving. He spoke at high schools, at veterans' halls, at city forums. He met with young black men who had their own stories, some too painful to share, others almost identical to his. They looked at him like a lighthouse in a storm, not because he was famous, but because he hadn't turned away. But every public appearance brought new risks. One night, after a panel discussion at a university in Savannah, Marcus returned to his car to find his tires slashed. A threatening note was tucked under his windshield wiper. Another time, a man followed him through a grocery store, muttering obscenities under his breath, then disappeared before security arrived. It was psychological warfare now. Small cuts meant to bleed slowly. Naomi's team filed restraining orders and tightened security, but the reality was clear. As the case moved closer to its verdict, the pressure was mounting on all fronts. Then, another break. A second whistleblower emerged, this time from within the county's IT department. He reached out through encrypted channels, verifying his identity and offering critical insight. The internal record system used by the sheriff's office had a secondary audit trail, one not visible to most employees, but accessible to administrators and certain tech personnel. That trail revealed a pattern of document tampering. Incident reports altered post-submission, timestamps modified, entire complaint files reclassified under misleading categories. The manipulation spanned over 5 years and implicated not just field officers, but supervisors and departmental heads. The whistleblower provided partial logs, screenshots, and a roadmap to navigate the system. Naomi's tech experts authenticated the material and prepared it for submission as supplemental evidence. It was the final thread they needed. When Naomi walked into the courthouse with the new data in hand, she wasn't carrying accusations. She was carrying proof. The judge reviewed the emergency motion behind closed doors and granted permission to present the material. The defense protested vigorously, claiming surprise evidence and lack of chain of custody verification. But the judge sided with Naomi, stating that the court had a responsibility to hear evidence of potential systemic misconduct. The trial, originally expected to last 3 weeks, was extended. The courtroom filled again. And this time, every word, every file, every logbook laid bare not just a single act of violence, but a culture of concealment. The betrayal wasn't just within the department. It was the department. And now, finally, it was on trial. The courtroom was full when the jury returned. Every seat had been claimed by a member of the press, a concerned citizen, or someone who had waited weeks for this moment. The judge's clerk moved briskly, organizing the final procedures. Marcus sat still, his shoulders square, jaw set. Naomi, calm as ever, flipped through her notes but didn't look down when the jury filed in. She didn't need to. She already knew what they had seen. The question was whether they had the courage to call it what it was. The foreperson, a woman in her 40s with a quiet but composed demeanor, stood with a verdict slip in her hand. Judge Whitaker asked for silence. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" he asked. "We have, Your Honor." The paper was passed, read, and the moment hung in the air like thunderclouds waiting to break. In the case of Marcus Walker versus Richmond County Sheriff's Office, on the charge of unlawful detention, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of excessive force, guilty. On the charge of civil rights violations, guilty. There was no eruption, no cheer, just a collective intake of breath, a ripple through the gallery as the weight of those words settled. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He simply let the moment exist. The judge continued reading. The officers, Wexler and Blake, were found personally liable for damages. The department was found complicit through deliberate indifference and policy failure. The court awarded Marcus compensatory and punitive damages totaling over $1.5 million. More importantly, the verdict mandated a formal review of department policies, including use of force training, complaint handling procedures, and data transparency requirements. But the court's decision triggered more than just financial consequences. Within 24 hours, the mayor called for a full audit of the Richmond County Sheriff's Office. The city council passed an emergency resolution initiating an independent oversight committee. Sheriff Elias Monroe, who had remained silent throughout the trial, resigned without statement 3 days later. Internal Affairs launched a parallel investigation into senior staff. Several high-ranking officers, including Lieutenant Brandon Avery, were placed on administrative leave pending review of evidence tampering and misconduct. The state's attorney general opened a formal inquiry into potential criminal charges. Captain Lisa Monroe was reinstated by an emergency vote, her suspension publicly reversed. She returned not to celebrate, but to supervise the overhaul process that she had once tried to initiate in private. Her return was symbolic, but also structural. She had work to do. Meanwhile, the department itself became the subject of national scrutiny. The verdict made headlines across the country. Editorials in major newspapers framed the case as a watershed moment in police accountability, not because it revealed something new, but because it proved what had long been suspected. That systemic misconduct was not just hidden, but protected. Naomi, standing on the courthouse steps that afternoon, addressed a crowd of cameras and microphones. "This victory isn't just for Marcus," she said. "It's for every person whose voice was silenced, whose complaint was ignored, whose truth was buried in bureaucracy. Today we reminded the system that justice delayed is still justice pursued, and eventually justice served." Marcus spoke last. His voice didn't waver. "I didn't ask to be here," he said. "I didn't come home to fight another battle. But once it started, I couldn't walk away. Because I knew I wasn't the first. And I knew I wouldn't be the last. If my pain had a purpose, let it be this: that the next time someone's rights are violated, they won't have to fight this hard to be heard." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was heavy, full of the kind of weight that comes from survival, from truth, from change that feels hard-earned and overdue. Over the next several weeks, reforms moved swiftly. The Sheriff's Department, under interim leadership, began rolling out new policies: mandatory de-escalation and bias training, independent civilian complaint review boards, and automatic public release of all body cam footage after major incidents. The software system that had enabled internal tampering was scrapped and replaced by a third-party platform with full transparency protocols. But the cultural shift wasn't just procedural. Veteran officers began speaking more freely about the unspoken rules that had governed the department for decades: the pressure to close ranks, the quiet retaliation against dissenters, the normalization of aggressive policing in certain neighborhoods. For many, it was the first time those conversations had been held in daylight. The Richmond County community began to change, too. Youth groups formed in the wake of the verdict, offering civic education and advocacy training. High schools invited Marcus to speak about accountability, service, and resilience. Local organizations hosted town halls, inviting citizens and police to talk, not in slogans or press statements, but in real dialogue. Marcus didn't take time off. He didn't disappear into privacy. Instead, he expanded Shield to Serve, now officially partnered with multiple legal clinics and advocacy groups nationwide. The foundation launched a pilot program offering legal navigation for veterans dealing with local law enforcement conflicts, with a focus on rural and underserved communities. He traveled to other cities, small towns like Augusta, where similar stories were unfolding in silence. He sat with families, listened to stories that echoed his own, and reminded them they weren't alone, that the system wasn't impenetrable, that justice was slow, painful, but possible. Back in Augusta, Evelyn Walker planted a garden in her front yard. Tasha passed her nursing exams and took a position at the local hospital. Marcus moved into a small home nearby, modest but peaceful. He kept his medals in a drawer, his court documents in a locked case, and his mornings reserved for quiet walks. Sometimes, he passed the diner where everything had begun, the same cracked sidewalk, the same faded awning. But now, when people saw him walking by, they didn't look away. Some nodded. Some said, "Thank you." Others just paused, recognizing the man who had stood firm when it would have been easier to walk away. Justice hadn't come quickly. It hadn't come easily. But when it did, it came fully. And with it, something even rarer than victory: change. It was a clear morning when Marcus stepped onto the stage at the National Veterans Advocacy Summit in Washington, D.C. The conference room was filled with veterans, lawmakers, journalists, and legal advocates from across the country. The walls were lined with banners celebrating service, justice, and reform. And at the center of it all stood a man whose story had transformed from a civil rights flashpoint into a national blueprint for resistance with purpose. He wore a charcoal suit, the same understated flag pin on his lapel, and held no script in his hands. The moderator introduced him briefly, but the applause that followed needed no prompting. When the room fell quiet, Marcus leaned into the podium microphone and spoke with the clarity of someone who had lived every word he was about to say. "I never imagined that coming home would mean fighting for my humanity," he began. "But what happened in Augusta wasn't just about me. It was about a system that failed to recognize the dignity of the people it sworn to serve." He paused, scanning the room. "Many of you have served. You know what sacrifice looks like. You've worn uniforms that symbolize trust, discipline, and honor. But when we come home, that uniform doesn't shield us from the world's assumptions. And in too many places, our service isn't enough to protect us from injustice." The silence in the room deepened. Heads nodded. Eyes watched, not out of pity, but out of recognition. Marcus continued, describing the birth and mission of Shield to Serve. Since the verdict, the foundation had launched legal clinics in 6 states, partnered with 3 major law schools, and secured funding for a mobile support unit to reach veterans in rural areas. Its hotline, staffed by both lawyers and former military personnel, had already assisted over 700 individuals in less than 5 months. "We're not just fighting cases," Marcus said. "We're building structures where silence used to be." After the summit, Marcus was approached by Senator Evelyn Brooks, a longtime advocate for criminal justice reform. She requested a private meeting. In a quiet corner of the conference center, she made an offer that startled him. Not flattery, not a speech invite, but a seat on a federal advisory board being assembled to evaluate nationwide policing standards involving military veterans. "You've proven you understand the stakes," she said, "and we need someone with both battlefield and courtroom experience to guide this conversation." Marcus accepted, not for recognition, but for reach. The board was still forming, but he would now have a voice in shaping the very policies that had once failed him. Back in Augusta, his life moved at a different rhythm. Tasha had begun volunteering with a local youth mentoring program, often bringing her older brother in to speak with high schoolers navigating racial profiling, broken trust, and their own questions of belonging. One day, after a session in a nearby school, a boy no older than 15 approached Marcus and asked, "Did you ever feel like giving up?" Marcus looked at him and answered honestly. "Yeah," he said, "but every time I thought about quitting, I remembered who'd get to tell my story if I stayed quiet, and I couldn't let it be them." The boy didn't say anything else. He just nodded slowly. In his personal life, Marcus began finding space for stillness. Long walks through local parks, mornings at the community center gym, meals shared with friends who had stood beside him, not just during the lawsuit, but before anyone knew his name. Anthony Sosa stayed in Augusta, now serving as Director of Operations for Shield to Serve. His military precision and logistical mind helped structure their growing national outreach. Evelyn, Marcus's mother, had taken to baking again, something she'd stopped doing for years, often leaving banana bread or sweet rolls on the front steps of the foundation's local office, just as quietly as she endured everything else. There were still days when the past returned, an unexpected knock, a letter without a sender, a whisper in public. But they no longer carried power. The verdict hadn't erased what happened. It had simply realigned the balance. In early spring, Marcus was invited to speak at West Point. He addressed cadets preparing for lives of service, some of whom would lead platoons, others who might someday wear badges. "You will be trusted with authority," he told them, "and what you choose to do with it will define you, not the uniform, not the oath. You." After the speech, a young cadet asked him how to prepare for the moment when loyalty to peers might conflict with loyalty to justice. "You already know what to do," Marcus said. "The hard part is choosing to do it when it costs you something." He left campus that day knowing that his new mission didn't replace the one he'd once served. It extended it. not across oceans or enemy lines, but within the systems he'd returned to, systems that could be rebuilt, redefined, reimagined, and that rebuilding had already begun. The city of Augusta created a civilian oversight commission with real authority, not just ceremonial influence. Several officers implicated in Marcus's case resigned quietly, while others faced ongoing investigations. More importantly, the department itself changed, not through slogans or press releases, but through structure. Recruits now underwent anti-bias training, with facilitators from SHIELD to serve. Complaints were processed by an independent review team. And for the first time in the city's history, a community liaison board met monthly with law enforcement leadership, publicly, transparently. Marcus never sought revenge. That's what made his story resonate so widely. He didn't burn bridges. He built roads where there had only been walls. The Foundation's motto, added quietly to its new website and engraved on a plaque outside its Georgia headquarters, read, "Service, truth, and dignity for every veteran, every voice." It wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about ensuring that no one else would face it alone. As spring turned to summer, Marcus sat on his porch one evening, the same one where silence had once felt like a cage. He watched the sun dip below the trees. There were no cars circling the block, no knocks at the door, just the sound of a city learning to breathe again. He didn't know what the future would demand of him, but he knew he would meet it standing tall, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a man who had turned pain into purpose and made sure the world listened.